We are very blessed today to have Dr. Snell joining us. He is the Director of Academic Programs and is the Editor-in-Chief of Public Discourse for the Witherspoon Institute in Princeton, New Jersey. For those of you who don't know about Public Discourse, it's an online journal that covers an array of topics in a variety of academic disciplines, and it's united by a common commitment to the idea that truth exists, is knowable, and should inform our politics and culture. It seeks to enhance public understanding of the moral foundation of free societies by making the scholarship of our fellows and affiliated scholars available and accessible to the general audience. So Dr. Snell has a large collection of articles on it that I would highly recommend reading into. Prior to joining Witherspoon, he was a professor of philosophy at Eastern University and a member of the faculty for the Princeton Honors College. He is an author or editor of 8 books and hundreds of essays for a variety of scholarly and popular journals. He has been a visiting instructor at Princeton University and has lectured at dozens of universities in the United States and Europe. He and his family reside in the Princeton area. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Well, so good to join you, and thank you for the introduction and the invitation to be here. I have to admit, I don't know Columbia very well. This is only like the 3rd time I've done anything at Columbia. And the first time that I spoke at Columbia, I went back to Princeton, and I annoyed the Princetonians by saying, you know, the Columbia students were just a lot more interesting than you are. The second time I came to Columbia, I went back and I annoyed the Princeton students by saying, they're a lot more interesting than you are. So let's keep it 3 for 3, shall we? Don't disappoint me and make me go back and say, you know what? Princeton students are more interesting than Columbia students. So I expect some good questions and some hard objections, and really good to be with you. So we're going to talk about burnout society. I suspect none of you have ever felt burned out. You got to Columbia by coasting in, and you've been coasting the whole time that you're here, and you have not thought of yourself as a brand or an entrepreneur, and you rest a lot. Fair description? Overwhelmed with rest. That's where you're at? Who did I just say that college was a retirement community for the young? And you looked at me like, I don't know about that exactly. So a few years ago, in what was then a widely noted essay, William Dershowitz, who was then of Yale, said, and I quote, "The nation's top colleges are turning our students into zombies." He noted that many of his students at Yale, I'm quoting, were bright, thoughtful, creative kids, but he also noted that they tended to color within the lines intellectually, that they didn't view ideas as especially interesting, and they were always dressed as if they were ready to be interviewed for a job at a moment's notice. Now, maybe it's just because they were Yaleys, but I wonder if you might note something similar in Dershowitz's description of students who are driven, accomplished, talented, hyper-disciplined, successful, and capable. And yet, as he continues, if you look beneath the facade of seamless well-adjustment, what you'll often find are toxic levels of anxiety, of emptiness, of aimlessness, and isolation. The project of not being successful terrifies them and disorients them. Mark Schiffman, who was then the chair of humanities at Villanova, said that contemporary students weren't majoring in physics or law or mathematics or philosophy. They were majoring in fear. And he said that Hunger Games really should be the novel of the generation. And here's how he writes it. The trilogy, if you've read The Hunger Games or seen the movie, depicts adolescents rigorously trained by adults for desperate but meaningless life or death competitions. And so afflicted with a desperate compulsion for competitive advantage, they rack up majors, minors, certificates, credentials, and internships to keep them in the running for what they feel to be an ever more elusive success. They're driven by fear. They're majoring in fear. Now, I hesitate to say it because I'm a non-judgmental sort of guy, but that sounds like a terrible life. It sounds like something's missing. It doesn't seem like a life lived particularly well despite the accomplishments. And note, Schiffman and Dershowitz, to my mind, are not really describing college students at Columbia and Yale. They're describing the lives really of many, most, quite a few Americans. Hurried, hasty, anxious, uncertain of purpose. It seems to me that students are doing exactly what they were told to do. They're mirroring their parents, their teachers, and their mentors. Because many people are like this now. That is, a whole lot of people in the West aren't so sure what humans are for. They're not so sure what the purpose of life is. They don't know what would make a life well lived. And so instead, they opt for accomplishment, for success, for racking up rewards. Visible marks that they're doing well, even if they're not so sure that they are well. Any of that sound familiar? Or let's do it this way. Does that describe any of your friends at Columbia? That's always the way to do that. Anybody have any friends at Columbia that are like that? Tell me about that. Are Columbia students majoring in fear? What's that look like? You're nodding? What's that look like?
Staying up late and sleeping 3 hours every night.
Okay. Probably with the help of some medications. Anybody else? How does that look like? What does that look like at Columbia? Not enough sleep, staying up too late, not enough rest. What else?
You're just rushing from one networking event to next, and just to catch up with the flow of investment bank or private equity recruitment.
So rush, all instrumentalized, right? Nothing is worse than a networking event, right? Because you've never met yet a friend at a networking event. What you meet is an opportunity, or more likely, a threat. Right? Because the threat is everyone else at the networking event, because they're going to take your job. Yeah. So that you don't sort of conclude a networking event by thinking, I had a good time. Never happened. And yet you rush from one to the next. Somebody else, how does this sound like Columbia?
Dissatisfaction in every accomplishment.
Okay, this is what we're going to talk about especially tonight. Dissatisfaction about every accomplishment, because none of them would be quite good enough to know that you are good enough, right? So you get the accomplishment, you take a moment to think, hey, I just won the whatever scholarship. And what do you do the very next moment? What's next? What's next? What's better? Now, one reason for this, and I assume it's not the only reason, is that we live in a disenchanted world. For us moderns, the cosmos is no longer full of spirits and gods, fairies and forms, but only causal forces that we harness for our own effects and our own desires. Now, that allows for really unprecedented technical and economic progress, but it also leads, and here I'm citing Charles Taylor, a wide sense of malaise at a disenchanted world, a sense of life as flat or empty, lacking meaning or purpose, a vision of life which accepts no final goals beyond human satisfaction, where human satisfaction is defined in a reductive and pragmatic sense, namely as utilitarian and technological. There really is, for that world, nothing more to look forward to than the next iPhone and the returns promised by economics, medicine, health, and social well-being. And those are all great things. I want health. I want a growing economy. But of course, there seems to be something not especially ultimate or final about the next iPhone or a growing economy. They're fine, but that can't be the point of life. So the range of our competence has shrunk to the technical. Right? How many of your classes at Columbia pause in the middle of their very high-flying technical apparatus and say, hey, what's the meaning of this? Or what's the point of this? Or ought we do this? How many of you have had classes that have never once asked what the point of the class was? They just taught you how to be efficient and successful at whatever it is they were doing. In fact, if you ask the question, but why, you would be an annoyance and a distraction, yes? Because we're not asking that question around here. Now, if we don't have competence in the point of it, then really what we have is technique to satisfy our desires, and that's supposed to stand in for meaning. But it turns out, and it won't take long to figure this out if you haven't yet, that the next iPhone or rising GDP or even the mythical corner office, well, it's great, isn't up to the task of giving meaning to life. There's always going to be the next iPhone, more money to make, somebody with a bigger corner office. And so if you're going to try to find meaning by relentless competition, it turns out you're going to, on shampoo, it gives you that ridiculous description like rinse, lather, repeat. That will be your life. Perform and repeat. Perform and repeat to no end. Now, this sense of the repetition that it never stops is also, I want to suggest, why there's so much anxiety about it all. What am I for? What am I to do? Not knowing, I turn my freedom to the things I do know how to do, which is to accomplish things. And insofar as I accomplish things, I prove to myself and to others that this freedom of mine has some merit, has some purpose, that I matter. that I am doing well. But it's probably not going to be enough. So I'm going to draw upon the Korean-German theorist Byung-Chul Han to give some arguments about why all of this sets up burnout society. He has a couple reasons. We'll explore them. You can interrupt me if you want at any point to feedback or object or hear more about it. So here's one of Han's big claims. He's drawing here upon the social theorist Michel Foucault. Foucault suggests that if you look at the history of society, one of the things you find in the West, and not just in the West, but it's what he's mostly interested in, is disciplinary society. Disciplinary society is a society in which we are taught to be productive, and if we are not especially productive, the mode of education and the mode of social control treats us as if we are economic misfits or non-productive. And so what you find in disciplinary societies are schools, dorms, barracks, and prisons. Because that's how you keep the economic machine working. Make your widgets, make your widgets. If you don't want to make your widgets, we're going to send you to the barracks or the prisons or the madhouse.
Aftermath of capitalism.
Yeah, that's right. Han's argument is that we no longer really live in a disciplinary society. We live in an achievement society, and that this is quite different. So if you'll forgive me, I'm going to read you quite a long quote from Han here, okay? Today's society is no longer Foucault's disciplinary society of hospitals, madhouses, prisons, barracks, and factories. It has long been replaced by another regime, namely a society of fitness studios, office towers, banks, airports, shopping malls, and genetic laboratories. 21st century society is no longer a disciplinary society, but an achievement society. Its inhabitants are no longer obedience subjects, okay? Not obedience subjects, but achievement subjects. They are entrepreneurs of themselves. Any of you within the last year been asked like what your brand is? Have you been asked what your brand is? That makes you an achievement subject, not an obedience subject. If you're an obedience subject, you're told, go work for IBM and produce this. If you're an achievement subject, you're asked, what's your brand? What are you producing? And your main form of what you have to produce and sell is you. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Han says that a disciplinary society is primarily a negative society. It's a society which tells you, thou shalt not do this. And the things that thou shalt not do are things like be lazy, waste your money, sleep in, and not be productive. Okay? Now, I grew up in a family like this. So there was a sense of like, are you doing something useful just now? Because if not, we can provide you with something useful to do. So there were a lot of thou shalts and thou shalt nots in my family growing up. And I had a perfectly happy family. But it was like, thou shalt not sleep in when there was good work to be done. Thou shalt not waste money. Thou shalt not be idle. Okay? So you start to work pretty hard to produce things, yes? But eventually, this is Han's argument, a society rooted in thou shalt and thou shalt not maximizes productivity, and it cannot go any farther. It has produced as much as it can do. But if you really want people to be productive, this is Han's claim, you don't tell them thou shalt or thou shalt not. You tell them you can. You can do it. Now, I know you've had this experience sometime. Let's go with final exams at the end of last term. Have you had the experience of basically being exhausted as you were preparing for your final exams, but you're aware that the person down the hall who's in the same laboratory or the same class had just put in like 8 more hours than you had studying for the exam? So what did you do? You thought, I can do it. So what did you do? You didn't go to sleep. You stayed up later. You worked all the more in order to demonstrate that you can. No, here the worry is not, as in disciplinary society, that you're not going to be a good producer. It's that you're going to be a loser. A loser. Now, what happens in the old world if you failed your exams? I'm talking like the 60s, let's say. What happens if you failed your exams or you got, you know the old joke, what do you call it, someone who went to medical school and got C's in the 60s? Doctor. What do you call someone who went to Yale in the 50s and 60s and got C's? Mr. President. What do you call someone who goes to Columbia in 2025 and 2026 who gets C's? It doesn't happen. No one's got a C ever at Columbia in the last 5 years, right? What would it be like to get a C at Columbia? Pretty bad, right? It would be the end of it, wouldn't it? So here's Han's claim. No one is less free than the people who are not under compulsion of the boss, but who are under compulsion of themselves to achieve. So if I order you to work, produce X number of widgets, by the time when you're done producing X number of widgets, what do? You go home. You stop. You go home. You stamp the time card and you go home. But if I say to you, you can achieve anything you want, when can you stop? Never. Han again. You can produces massive compulsion on which the achievement subject dashes him or herself to pieces. Because it appears as freedom, because nobody's telling you to do it. No one's saying thou shalt or thou shalt not. All they're saying is you can do it. Right? That seems like freedom, not like compulsion. Because it appears like freedom, self-generated compulsion is not recognized as such. You can exercises even greater constraint than you should. That's its ruse. Now, whoever fails is at fault and personally bears the guilt. Like if you fail, who do you get to blame? You just didn't do enough work. There's no one to bear the guilt except for you. No one else can be made responsible for your failure, nor is there any possibility for pardon, relief, or atonement. In this way, there's a crisis of debt. In our world, there is no possibility for atonement, which would free the debtor, you, from liability. And this gives us, he says, not only burnout, but depression, which is an unredeemable failure of ability. It amounts, he says, to psychic insolvency, literally the inability to pay the debt that you owe. But to whom do you owe the debt? Just yourself, to demonstrate that you can do it. All right, so that's one. There's the compulsion of achievement society in which no one is telling you what you ought to do. They're merely telling you that you can do it. And because you can keep achieving, you can keep achieving, and you can keep achieving. But here's the second point that goes with that. There is no end or sense of completion to that. I'm sure you've had this experience. You're good students. You've done a full day's work. In fact, you've done more than a full day's work. You've worked all day. Because you're a student in 2026, you're not just studying one subject, right? You're sort of listening to one textbook being read to you as you have one screen going here on that subject and another screen. How many of you are multi-screeners and use multimedia as you study? You're studying like 3 different things at once. Anybody want to admit that? You? Tell me how you study using various forms of information flow.
Like audiobooks and then like tablet and also computer.
All at the same time, right? Let's all go in at the same time. All right, so let's imagine that you've actually done not 1 day's worth of work, but 3 days worth of work because you have 3 streams of information coming at you, okay? You have dinner, and now it's time to rest and relax with friends, right? Your day's complete. Do you stop at 8 o'clock? Why not? You've just done 3 days worth of work.
Still an hour though.
An hour? An hour, loser. This guy stops at 9 o'clock. You've done 3 days worth of work. Why don't you stop at 8?
How much more can you do more days?
What was the language?
You could do more days.
No, what was the language? You can do more. Now note how there is no terminus to that. There's no punctuation mark. How many of you have no sense, honest question, how many of you have no sense that there would be a well done, good and faithful worker at any point in your day? Well, you stop at 9, don't give me that. Explain that to me. No sense that in any point in the day you would justifiably expect to hear, well done, good worker, good and faithful servant, stop. Explain that to me. How is it impossible to imagine that there was a point of closure? Explain that to me. You see how that's a psychic insolvency? You could never pay that off. It would never stop. It would never close. Explain it to me. Yeah, don't look away. You.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Nice try, though. I've taught for a while. She looks this over here.
Honestly, I do give myself like intended breaks because I know I'm gonna go over just I kind of just started to get a sense of like when my work becomes like poor quality.
No, listen to what you've just said. You rest so you can work more and work better. You didn't say that you stopped. You said, I take a break. Like you're thinking of yourself like a Tesla. You're charging to go farther and faster. That's not a rest, right? You literally said my work efficiency was decreasing. You're like a machine. It was going, oh, and you thought, I better get back to, right? That's not rest. That's psychic insolvency. Explain that to me.
I guess like to your point is like just thinking like if I can't do good work now, then I have to stop so I can keep doing that.
No. You're confusing good work with quantity of work. Aren't you? More work, faster work, more efficient work. Why can't good work be slow work or very little work?
I guess if you have large goals that are long term, it's hard to really say like, oh, this is the amount that I need to contribute to in order to get that. It's always the more I do, the better, the more likely I'll get there.
So everybody gets the kind of achievement society without closure. This is part one. We have achievement subjects as opposed to disciplinary subjects without closure. Everybody get that? Okay, let's add two more things. Here's the second of the three. Information. Think about the way you process information. So one of the things that endlessly fascinates me, so I'm an old humanist. I was trained by old Jesuits. And there was a sense that the slowness of the conversation was the point. I once had a year-long class where we made it through 100 pages of a book. Year-long class, we made it through 100 pages of the book. The book was 400 pages long. We didn't even make it through a quarter of the book. Greatest class I ever had. And every day, sometimes these are 3-hour seminars. Sometimes we make it through 2 words in a day. Amazing. What a waste of time, right? So think about the way you think of information. So one of the things I love to do is there's this one large lecture at Princeton that I'm part of. And I've heard the lectures a lot, so I sit in the back so I can do my own work. But I watch students, and what they are is information processing machines. So they have their screen open, they have multiple apps going. They're not listening to the lecture at all. This kid is like day trading on stocks and bonds. This kid is on like FanDuel selling like betting options. This guy over here is buying and selling classic ASICs. One day I said to him, why are you on these old ASICs websites? And he says to me, I made $2,000 in lecture today. What'd you do? But then you'll notice that their like antennae go up and they realize, ooh, that sounds like something that might be on an exam. And they'll open up Wikipedia or the Supreme Court Reporter or some sort of like law blog, which is relevant. And they open it up, they cut and paste the information from Wikipedia into their notes. Look at you, this is shameful. Into their notes and then turn off again. Now, because they have high executive capacity and a good working memory, they could probably, if you ask them at the end of class, like, what was Lochner about, sort of like mentally scan the notes that they just cut and pasted and be like, well, Lochner was a case of substantive due process. There was a dispute about the safety of bakeries in New York. But if you ask them, yeah, but what does that mean? They would look at you the way you looked at me, and they would turn and look at someone else. Because they have no idea, because they're not even trying to understand. They have what Han calls serial perception. Serial perception is the way that information works on the internet. You know you've done this. I'm interested in subject matter X, so I click the link. This link gives me like 15 more links, yes? I click all 15 eventually. I have like 15 tabs open. Each of those 15 has like another 12 links. You can do the math. I can't because I studied philosophy, right? Notice how the information just cascades. And you pay attention to it, not the way a slow reader does, where you chew, or the words of Thomas Cranmer, read, mark, and inwardly digest the text. You are noting it all in a series of information, yeah? But you have high executive function and a good working memory, so your serial perception is all, in a sense, captured. But note, slow reading goes either deeply into the text, or slow reading goes transcendent or vertical from the text. When we go deeply into the text, we are lost in the text, reading and wondering about the meaning of the words and their implications, right? The text goes vertically when we wonder, what does this mean? Is there a God? Am I going to die? What is the purpose of my death? Serial perception just extends horizontally forever. And I know you've done this if you're working on a junior paper or senior thesis. The great fear, of course, is that you haven't read all the relevant information. Now, how much relevant information is there?
Infinite.
Endless. Starting to hyperventilate just a little bit? Could you see how that would be exhausting and lead to anxiety and a kind of burnout? Right, so one, we have achievement society with no closure. Two, serial perception. This is really how information technology works. And note how the way we think of information buttresses the sense of there being no closure. Because there's just more and more and more and more. Here's the third. A sense that what matters most is what can be counted. So Han has a line. I can't tell if I think this is a really great line or if it's painfully corny and kitschy. You tell me. So how many of you have a grandparent or great-grandparent who, in a sense, understand what I mean? Their life didn't count for very much. Now, understand what I mean. They didn't make a lot of money. They didn't have many accolades. Their obituary will not appear in the New York Times. Right? Their life didn't count for very much. Not large amounts of money, not large amounts of property, not many accomplishments to count, like 1, 2, 3, 4 prizes. Okay? Anybody have a grandparent like that? Do you like them? Now, how many of them do you suppose have lives which don't count, but which are recountable? You could tell a story about them. She was always there for me. When I was lonely, he was my best friend. So when my blessed, beloved grandmother died, she did not have a life that counted. She finished 8th grade. She was a farmer. Like, the big accomplishment in life was to have a set of china, which wasn't very fancy china, and like a house. She raised her children. At her funeral, though, there were people at the funeral that we didn't know. This is a small little town in Western Canada, including a woman who worked at the town's clothing shop. We didn't know who she was, and she told this story. She recounted this story about my grandmother. Your grandmother used to come in twice a week, and she would come in and say, "Oh, I've made too much lunch. I'm not hungry. Would you eat this lunch?" And she said, I knew that she knew that I had recently been abandoned by my husband, and I did not have enough money to feed my children and also eat myself. But she didn't wish to embarrass me, so she just constantly forgot that she wasn't hungry and brought in extra food. That's a life to recount. Now, if the point of life is to have a life which counts, it will never stop. There's never enough money. There's never enough accolades, right? Even if someone hands you the Nobel Peace Prize, it's not really yours. There's always another byline at a better magazine or at a better newspaper. You can always have one more, one more, one more. And if the one driving you in this task is you, and you're never satisfied with who you are, your life is going to count a whole lot, and no one will have much to recount about you. There won't be a narrative about your life other than a list of accomplishments, and you don't buy that the list of accomplishments mean very much. Here's my simple example. Remember when you we used to get the big envelopes, it was exciting, now you just hit the email, and you're like, I got into Columbia, great. Remember that day? Any of you videotape yourself? Whatever we call it these days, videotape. Record yourself opening the email and you have yourself jumping up and down. Any of you do that? You're so excited to get in Columbia. Right, you arrived at Columbia day one, you moved into your dorm or your apartment or whatever, and then you looked around and you thought, boy, everyone here is so smart, and you immediately panicked that you shouldn't be here and you weren't going to be good enough, right? By your sophomore year, you were starting to think about whether you would get into medical school or law school. Yeah? Okay, you get into law school, good. Now you're in the associate pool. What firm is it going to be? Really huge New York firm? Down at the mouth DC firm? All right, you're in the associate pool. You're going to make partner? You're going to make managing partner? Good, you made managing partner, but at a top 50 firm? Somebody laughed like, oh, the horror. Did you hear her, the anxious laughter? Like, top 50, oh! It has to be top 10, right? Your life won't count for very much, and it also won't recount a whole lot either. That's no good. So, as I understand the way we are now, we struggle to see reality as good. We don't look at ourselves and the world and think of it as a gift. And we are, according to the words of Joseph Pieper, beset by what he calls existential poverty. We're a society of really fat wallets and really thin souls. And we're trying to convince ourselves that if our wallet is fat enough, our soul will matter. That's burnout society. So we need to see better. We need to see the world and affirm the world the way that God does, which is good. And in order for that to happen, we need to have a change of viewpoint. A change from the frantic desire to do and to have and to rack up accomplishment. Now, I'm sure you know this. This is like standard fare. Everybody says this, but nobody believes it or does it. Traditionally, pride of place has been given not to work, but to leisure. I mean, some of you know your Greek. What does the word school mean? Leisure. School means leisure. You're at leisure time here, not rest so you can work better. The word school means leisure. But leisure, it doesn't mean simple downtime. It's not non-activity. It's not taking a rest. It's not taking a break so you can get up enough sort of steam to work again. Leisure is a spiritual and mental attitude. It's an attunement to the goodness and richness of the world and of the real. It's a condition of soul. It's not merely a condition of having time. Leisure stands in a kind of radical openness and amazement towards the real. In my own mind, one of the best sort of images of radical openness to the world is either standing like this or mouth open, desperately waiting for the Eucharist to be placed on tongue or hand. Note then, if leisure's like that, it's not a passivity, it's not a hanging back, it's a radical expectation or anticipation of the good. It's a leaning in. People often get this wrong in Scripture when God rests on the seventh day. He doesn't actually rest on the seventh day. This is a bad reading of the text, as if God works for 6 days and then he's like, whoo, kind of takes a break. What God does on the seventh day is make Sabbath. He makes rest. The universe is not finished until he has made the Sabbath. Rabbi Heschel says that the Sabbath is first in God's intention and the last in God's execution. But creation doesn't end at the end of, is not finished at the end of day 6. It's finished when God has made Sabbath or has made rest. And the point of the week is to get to rest or Sabbath or leisure with God. This is a loving exception. This is a reaching forward. Now, traditionally, we've often thought about this as contemplation. That to be capable of leisure is to be capable of having a contemplative attitude. Now, I myself don't like the word contemplation very much to explain this. There's nothing wrong with it. I just think it gives the wrong connotation. I suspect that in our world, when you hear the word contemplation, you sort of imagine the statue of the philosopher, right? Like contemplation is like, thinking deeply about something. That's not actually how the tradition exhausts contemplation. Contemplation can include things, Pieper says, like a festival. A real party or a real feast is contemplative. Contemplation is not best understood merely as thinking about things, although that can be a form of contemplation. Contemplation is best understood as doing an activity for its own sake, for no other reason than it is an activity worth doing. So let's think about the networking event versus a friend or a date. We used to go on dates when I was young. You can still do it. I can tell you how. Some of you are scandalized that I got to go on dates and you don't get to. Look at you, look at me. Think of the networking event. One is there merely to instrumentalize the relationship, yes? You are here because I am here talking to you because you have access to a good that I would like to obtain. Yes? That's all that's there. Now, if you're a good person, you don't treat them merely as a means to an end. You don't lie to them. You don't harm them. You don't defraud them. But everybody kind of contractually agrees. Yes, I'm going to use you and you're going to use me so that I get an employee and you get a job and we all make money. What's not to like? It's a networking event. As opposed to, think, a date that went really well. That also can happen. Think about that date that went really well and you had that experience of, wait, what time is it? Wow, it's a lot later than I thought it was. Because what was happening on the date or with the conversation with the friend? You were doing it for no other reason than it was worth doing. Imagine trying to form a friend, a real friend, because of the benefits they can give you, not a friendship. Whereas a genuine friendship, where you are lost in conversation with the self who is the second version of you, the second self, why do you seek that friendship? Because it's good. Or why do you play? Because it's good. Why do you look at art? To impress your friends? Because it's good. Why do you seek knowledge? Because it's good. Why do you wish to fall in love and be loved in return? Because it's good. Why do you seek to have a party with your friends where one dances and sings? Not to relieve stress, not to gas up the engines so you can work more tomorrow, but because it's good. That's all contemplation. Pieper's worry is that we are so existentially impoverished, so poor of soul, that we can't actually pursue things that are good for their own sake. We're always looking for the benefits of the thing, and so we can never have a contemplative disposition, and we can never really have leisure. He says somewhere, the problem is not throwing a party, the problem is finding someone capable of having a feast. Now, as an aside, which I intend to be somewhat obnoxious, is your education making you existentially rich or existentially poor? And if it's making you existentially poor, it's not an education. It's technical training. So, how do you become rich? How do you become rich in 3 easy steps? Existentially rich. Existentially rich. First, silence. One of the problems with the way that we use information, the way we consume information, remember the serial perception, is that we are unable to linger with the ideas. We're the same way with people. At a networking event, do you ever linger with the person? That'd be odd, wouldn't it? So you've exchanged business cards, or whatever one does. I'm like so old. Like, you don't have business cards. You do whatever you do on your phones, right? Do you just sort of hang around and say, tell me about you, or are you on to the next person? That's the point of networking. A successful networking event is either when you've met the most important person or you've met the most number of people, yes? In fact, you've had this experience, I'm sure you have. This happens all the time in DC. I'm sure it happens in New York too, where the person talking to you is always looking just a little over your shoulder. And why are they looking over your shoulder?
To see the next.
Either the next or to see if someone more important than you is here. Now, people who are really adept at this abandon you without making you feel bad, right? They're like, hey, good to see you. And they kind of give you the slap, and then like, boo, they're over to like, the CEO or the CFO, and you're left there with your like pathetic watered down drink and your business card that you never got to give to them. Whereas people who are awkward at this make you feel abandoned when they leave. But this is the same way, you with your, your Audible book going and your multiple screens, are you lingering with the ideas? Are the ideas delighting you? Has an idea even occurred to you, or is it just information flow on a conveyor belt? I suggest you will never be happy in your work or your life if you're incapable of lingering. It's why you miss being a child. Anybody take a bit of a snow day and have a snowball fight or sled or anything this last week? Anybody do that? Time was great, wasn't it, that day? Because it was like being a kid again, right? You lingered. And it was really fun. Friendship is like that. Study is like that. Education is like that. Worship is like that. All the things which matter most are things which demand that we linger. And I guarantee that when you linger with something, you will enter into a kind of silence or a kind of appreciation of the thing. When you fall in love, you linger with a person, and eventually you run out of words to say, and you just sort of behold the beloved in great delight. That's lingering. Second, bit of advice on how to become rich. Think of an audience of one, and don't have that audience of one be you. So you're going to find, you already have found, there's 1,000 judges in your life. The teachers have been judges. The college board has been a judge. The admission committee at Columbia has been a judge. Your parents' friends at the country club have been judges. Your peers and classmates are all judges. And of course, the worst judge is yourself, because, frankly, you can never demonstrate to yourself that you're not a full loser. Right? Camera's not on. How many of you, your greatest fear really is not really that you'll have like a corrupt soul, but that you'll be a loser? There's only one judge whose judgment fundamentally matters. And if you work as if God is always watching, and God always is watching, and if you're doing your work fundamentally as an offering to God, who is looking, I promise you, looking to say, well done, good and faithful servant. We have this image of God as being very stingy in his praise, but that's not the story we see in Scripture. The father of the prodigal son is waiting. He's waiting, and the son really is a loser, right? But he's waiting to see, and he's rushing out to see. Or the parable of the sower and the seeds. I grew up on a farm. You don't plant good seed in bad soil because it's a waste of money and resources. So the story used to offend me when I was a child. But in the parable of the sower who's God knows that this soil is rocky, and this soil will be crowded out with thorns and thistles, and this will have birds, right? And yet does not hold the soil or the seed merely for like the most profitable places, just throws it everywhere with abandon, because God is looking to draw us to him. St. Ignatius of Loyola, God is seeking to communicate to us at all times and all ways. He's desperate for us to note him, and he's desperate to envelop us in his fatherly love. And his fatherly love is one which is wanting to say, well done. Work for the audience of one and you'll be free. Third, you have to tell yourself a story that can be recounted as opposed to merely counted. If you're imagining that a successful life is like a house on Montauk and in Arizona and the boat and the whatever, those are great things. Those are great. Get them, enjoy them, invite me over. But you have to have a point to it. When Amy and I were first married, we had no money. I was in graduate school. She was like a substitute teacher for a little bit until she was getting her gig going and I was getting my gig going. And I was just working like around the clock I was trying to get a career in philosophy. Trust me, there aren't careers in philosophy. And I was trying to get one. So there'd be like Friday nights where I'd be like at the books. And the story we would tell ourselves is, we're doing this for the babies. We didn't have any children yet. We were doing this for the babies. Now what we say all the time is, do this for the grandbabies. And we don't have any grandchildren yet. We've got 5 kids, none of them are married, they're still in college or at home. We're doing it for the grandchildren already. Note that we're trying to tell ourselves a story that can be recounted. I'm going to be a granddad, I'm going to be a father, I'm not just going to be a CV. Tell yourself a story. Fourth, if you're going to imagine that God really is the sole audience, the audience of one, you're going to have to practice the presence of God. You're going to have to get yourself into a place where if you're going to remind yourself that the story is God's approval and friendship forever, and that God is the judge who matters most, and that he's looking to be pleased and to say, well done, good and faithful, and he's looking to extend grace, and he's throwing seeds of grace in your way. All you need to do is remind yourself and place yourself in the presence of God. But to do so, you'll have to linger, and you'll have to be contemplative, and you'll have to practice some silence. Now, you've got a lot to do. You don't have as much to do as you think you do, by the way. It's going to get a lot worse in about 5 years. But you have a lot to do. If you just give in to the Audible book and the screen and you're selling ASICs at the same time and day trading and doing options of sports betting, you'll never pause, no matter how briefly, to do an aspiration, to remind yourself you're a child of God, to place yourself into the presence of God, and to tell yourself that it is God who is watching and it is God who's looking to approve. So you need some form of a plan of life, however simple or however complicated, where you go to Mass, you do a morning offering, or you stop very briefly for the Angelus, or you stop very briefly to rectify your intentions. At 3 p.m. most days, my alarm goes off and it just says rectification, and all I ask myself is, was I doing this for the right reasons? And invariably, I'm not. Invariably, I'm doing it for myself, And I have to say, nope, do this for the audience of one, do this for the babies, do this for. Those are not complicated, but you could do them. Fifth and finally, keep the Sabbath. Keep the Sabbath in some fashion. Of all the things, it seems to me a healthy respect for Sabbath is utterly vital, and that your university, like every other university, fundamentally disdains the Sabbath and does not wish you to have the Sabbath. They wish you to work nonstop and around the clock. But if you can't pause to give a tithe of time to God in worship, you won't be able to find lingering or presence or a narrative or a plan of life. I happen to think that Sabbath is the best form of resistance that you can have against achievement society. Think about the Hebrews in Hebrew scripture. When manna starts to come, manna does not fall on the Sabbath. Right, so there's already like magical bread from heaven. Sound familiar? There's like magical bread from heaven. And if you store up on Tuesday, 2 days worth, you know the story, what happens to the extra that you've stored up on Tuesday? It goes bad. Except on the day before the Sabbath, you can store up for 2 days because no manna is coming on the Sabbath. Because the Sabbath is not a time to work. The Sabbath is a time of extra generosity and extra rest and extra worship. You have to remember God, who God is. In the Christian understanding of the world, God is a communion of love. God is a mutuality of delight. God is a communion which seeks to diffuse itself and communicate itself as widely as possible. So the like basic principle, not just of reality, but before and beyond all temporal and contingent reality, is generosity and generativity. So the whole point of the universe is that it flows from and returns to God and needn't. God has no compulsion to create. He gains nothing from creating. He loses nothing from creating. He doesn't need to create. There's no itch. There's no internal compulsion. There's no external compulsion. He creates entirely freely without necessity and without loss because he is endless generosity and generativity. All you need to do is put yourself in the flow of that generosity, and it turns out Sabbath is a great way to do that. And Sabbath and the great thanksgiving of Sabbath will make you existentially very rich because you will put yourself in the presence of God. You will linger with God. You will have a story about the point. You will have something of a plan of life, at least of that day. And if you keep Sabbath well, yeah, you'll go to Mass, you should, but you'll also spend an inordinate amount of time partying and resting. I mean, the main thing that we do on the Sabbath is eat, right? I mean, we can do that every day. But we're to hear Mass, and the source and summit of the Mass is the Eucharist. So the point of Sabbath is to eat. Why wouldn't we have a Eucharistic life where the rest of the day you're feasting with your friends? The Sabbath is a day to push back the chairs and to dance. The Sabbath is a day to recite poetry. The Sabbath is a day, chastely and modestly, to kiss. The Sabbath is a day to spend more money than you would normally spend on a good bottle of wine and to make a good dinner and to linger with friends because it's all a continuation of the Sabbath. And by the way, it's a pretty good life. All right, that's all I got. Questions? Please.
Sorry, I wrote it down.
Not a fan of the talk, apparently.
So, would you agree that burnout comes from man desiring someone else to tell him he did a good job?
Well, that's part of it. I think if Han is correct, burnout comes from your inability to convince yourself that you've done a good job.
Then, would then the solution be that, from what I took from what you said, is man does what he thinks to be good according to God's words, and then man can then tell himself, at least I know I'm trying to be good.
If you, think of the difference between a life of grace and a life of achievement. If you think that you're going to be able to muster up a life that's so impressive to God that God thinks, I really have to let her into heaven because she was so impressive, it's not going to happen. If on the other hand you think, I would really like to be given the merits of Christ's righteousness as if they were my own, you'll get into heaven. So We're looking to receive grace. We're looking to anticipate grace. And of course, grace allows us to cooperate. Right? We do think that grace allows us to work. We think that grace presupposes nature and perfects and elevates and heals nature. So it's not that we think that anything human is limited by grace. Grace is always going to make us more human, more capable, more able to cooperate and to work and be as we ought to be. Christianity is a humanism if it's anything else, properly understood. But the point is that we can rest in our own efforts when we are able to rest in the confidence and those acts of hope that God wills our good and is acting to bring about our good. It's a big deal for me. This has been a big deal in my own life. So I'm a convert to Catholicism. I grew up in a religious community that fundamentally disagreed with God in Genesis 1, where God says, hey, this is good. Well, that's good. Well, that's good, 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 and very good. We fundamentally disagreed with that. We looked at the world and we thought, well, that's bad. And that's bad. And that's bad. It's all very bad, and I'm bad too. There's an image I love. This is sort of corny, but forgive me. This is face, and this is back. In the beginning, this is the story I grew up believing. This is God, this is me. Faces and backs. In the beginning, God created us to be in communion with him, but we turned away from God, so God turned away from us. God's wrath is such that he turned away from us. And we're constantly trying to get back to God, but because we're such wretchful sinners, he has to keep turning his back to us. And we keep trying to get to God, he keeps turning his back to us, and then finally he's like, fine, and incarnation happens. That's not the story at all. The story is, here we are, created in the beginning, face to face with God, meant for communion. And we are like, no thanks, I'd rather do it my own. And God's like, how about I give you the proto-evangelium right away as a sign of hope? How about I tell you we're going to get face to face again? We're like, nah, I'd rather be Lamech, with killing my 70 and 70 times 70 or whatever. I'd rather be Cain. I'd rather be Lamech or whatever. God's like, how about I give the covenant with Abraham? No thanks. How about first the rainbow? No thanks. How about the covenant with Abraham? No thanks. All right, how about I send the judges? No thanks. How about I send David? No thanks. Fine, how about I just become you? So that I can finally get to you, and insofar as I am you perfectly, perfect God and perfect man, God's glory in part is man fully alive. Presto, done. That's good news. That's the gospel. The gospel means good news. That's good news. If you accept that the gospel is true, you realize that God does not hate any of his creatures or will for their destruction. He wants their good, and he's seeking to provide it. And a whole lot of our task is to let him, because it's grace. And insofar as we let him, lo and behold, we find we are not diminished, but enlarged. We'll count and recount, because the judgment of the one who matters is the judgment which is true. Again, I'm very childlike when I think about God. You've done this with a kid before. Remember being a kid? So I love to do, when my kids were little, I love to do this. Take them up, put them on top of the fridge, and then walk away. And they're like 2, and they're like, oh, right? And then you sort of wait, pretend you can't hear them. They're sort of shrieking, and then you grab them, and they're like, oh, Dad, don't do that. And then what do they say immediately? Go back. Again! So you stick them up again, and they're like, oh, and they cry and complain. You come and you get them, like, that was amazing. Again, right? Chesterton has this notion, you get it, it's like not technically scientifically true, but go with the point. Why has the sun risen every day for 13 billion years? You get the point? Because God, like a child, goes again, because it's good. How dare our judgments be that it's not good? He thinks it's good, so should we. And you don't have to be good enough for it to be good. Because you're already created in his image and likeness, and he has already died for your salvation, and is already eagerly longing for you to enter into the kingdom of God. He's already declared that he wants you as his child. You don't have to gussy up your resume for that. No, gussy up your resume, that's good too. Please, multitasker.
Is there any logical reason why we have more burnout side here in America, which are Protestantism, versus Europe, Catholicism?
Could be. I mean, everybody sort of knows the thesis of Weber about the Protestant work ethic. I don't know if it's true or false. Everybody knows that the Catholic countries in the Mediterranean have better food than the Anglosphere, and they spend a longer time eating it, and they have more conversation, right? But in part, just the food's better. You've been to Spain, you've been to Dubuque. I mean, they're different, right? But there is also a sense that there's an old legacy of the feast days, right? There is an old legacy of the excess of the nobles and the aristocrats not being theirs to keep. There is a tradition in Catholic social teaching of the superflua, that at some point, what you have earned through your honest labor, when you have enough to provide the necessities and the dignity for yourself and your dependents, is not technically yours anymore, but belongs to the universal destination of goods. And while you're allowed to steward and manage it, it's not technically speaking under your ownership, even though it's under your rights of stewardship. Like, that's all a story of generosity and enough. Right? If you read about the guilds in the medieval era, right? Like, you have enough now. We need to make sure that she has enough. Whereas if the story of the Protestant work ethic is true, one of the enormous anxieties of being a Calvinist is if you're one of the elect, it's so sweet. Because like, you can't go to hell because you're one of the elect. Doesn't really matter in a sense what you do, but you don't know if you're one of the elect. Think about the anxiety. Am I one of the elect? Am I not one of the elect? And if one of the marks of being the elect is temporal success, you could see how that thesis might have some legs. I don't know if the thesis is true or not, but you do see generosity in traditional Catholic societies that you don't see in traditional Protestant societies, including feasts.
I actually have a question about what if like your this kind of rush, when you face a competition, for example, the U.S. and China are driving the AI race, but the technology, whoever gets the technological advantage basically dominates over the world politics and or the economic order. Yep. So what if like your competition, like so should you just admit defeat if you rest and then you kind of lost the race? Even though countries are collectively collective individuals, that's very complicated. But very grossly speaking, should you just admit defeat and submit to the order dominated by the other party because you rest and the other?
Sure. So a few things. One, nothing in what I'm saying suggests that we should be lack industry or we should be lazy or not be intelligent and not work to the full extent of our capacities. We're given gifts by God. In addition to the story of the sower and the seeds, there's also the story of the talents. And if 10 talents have been given, the harsh master comes back and is looking for a return of 10. Like there's a story of graciousness. There's not a story of indolence or presumption to be found in the Gospels, right? So despair is the vice that God wouldn't be able to save us, that there is no hope. Presumption is the sense of course, we're just sort of like magically taken care of here by God and everything's going to be fine and we're going to heaven at the end of the day too. So there is nothing in what I'm claiming which says we should be stupid or lazy or indolent or ignorant or not try or not succeed. So that's one. Two, at the same time, what does it profit a man to gain the world but lose his soul? So if what we're doing in order to win is in some ways material or formal collaboration with evil, we ought not do it. Now, I'm not suggesting like working on AI is material or formal collaboration with evil. I happen to think it probably is, but I'm unwilling to defend that just now. I'm not suggesting that you can't work in complicated fields. I'm not suggesting that competition itself is a bad thing. I am suggesting if we are winning at the cost of souls and persons, that that's not to be done. In his encyclical Laborum Exercens, John Paul II says that there are two dimensions of work. They're both important, but one has priority over the other. The two dimensions of work are the objective dimension and the subjective dimension. The objective dimension of work is the work done well according to the standards of the work. So if I'm an architect and the building is ugly or collapses, I'm a bad architect and I did the work objectively badly. If I'm a philosopher and my arguments are invalid, the objectivity of the work is done very badly. If I'm an investor and I just lose all my clients' money, I'm not a very good investor. But the subjective dimension of work, which has priority over the objective dimension, doesn't mean the objective dimension doesn't matter. It means you can't pass the test of good work by failing the subjective test, but passing the objective test. You have to pass them both, but there's still a logical priority. Does the work lead to the elevation, perfection, and healing of persons? And if the work comes at the expense of the degradation of the worker, it's bad work by definition. Not all things, winning isn't the only thing. There's providence. Don't you believe in God? All those things can be true at the same time, by the way. Somebody else, please.
My question is somewhat similar to her first question. So I understand what you're saying about like counting versus recounting. We only want to do things that count.
Is that corny or good?
No, I think it's good.
Okay, I'm going to keep going with it then.
But my question is, like, one thing that you didn't talk about was how comparison with other people fits into this, and it's like how much of it is my accomplishments will never be good enough, or how much of it is like my accomplishments will always come second to someone else.
Yeah. So comparisons are odious, of course, right? So I'm the father of 5. This is an important parenting trick to learn before you become a parent, to teach your kids that comparisons are odious, right? So like one of the children gets an A, we've all gotten an A. One of the children goes to jail, we've all gone to jail here, the whole family, right? Because we're in this together and we're a unit. So comparisons are odious. I think where Han's really interesting in his thought is I suspect that most of us think that what's making us work so hard is comparison. Like my big brother got into Columbia, I need to get into Columbia. My little sister is already, has her first patent, and I'm here as an engineer with no patents at all. Like, what kind of loser am I? That's a real social dynamic, right? We have envy, we have competition. I think where Han's really interesting is that at the end, though, even if you were able to remove the comparison problem, in an achievement society, you'd still work yourself to death. In other words, so let's imagine you've now bested your little sister and your big brother, whatever your situation is, right? Your big brother only made it to Brown and you got into Columbia. Take that, Thomas, right? Or your little sister's patent's only pending and you already have 2, okay? You've beaten them. And all marks are that the trajectory is continuing on. So let's imagine that we satisfy social envy and social competition. Happy now? Or are you going to keep going?
I guess keep going, but I think to a certain extent, the realm of possibility is defined by other people.
Sure. I don't disagree. Of course, envy is one of the capital sins, yeah? Because we're going to be envious. We're going to covet. It seems to me, though, that if Han is correct, that's a universal human condition at all times and all places. I mean, there's a reason we have it in the 10 Commandments and in the sort of contemporary life. I think if Han is correct, though, what is most difficult for us is the endlessness of achievement society, which is not about social comparisons, but about a sense that it doesn't matter if I beat everyone, I still would not be good enough. Because there's
Mars.
Because I'm the boss and I can do it, or we can do it. Mars awaits to be conquered, and there's no closure to that, and no sense that you would be able to say, "Good job, I can take it. I can, stop."
Okay, you talked about how vice through envy can be a motivating factor for achievement, but it seems like most achievements are aligned with virtue in that it takes a lot of perseverance, diligence, temperance, self-control, whatever. Like it seems like the extent of virtue, it kind of has no end. And so like in pursuit of these achievements, you're pursuing virtue in some way.
There's a famous early modern text by Mandeville called The Fable of the Bees, and it was his defense of how individual vice leads to social good. So I'm really greedy. I don't know about you, I'm really greedy. Like, how much money do I want? Just a little more. Just a little more? That'd be enough, just a little more? So because I want just a little more, what do? Well, I show up to work on time, or I stay overtime, and I am frugal, and I'm industrious, and I save, and I plan, right? All of which allows me to build up wealth, build up capital, build up skills. These are all good things, right? They're even virtues, some of them. Thrift is a kind of social virtue. Industry is a kind of virtue. These are all great things. Of course, the older tradition, so that's Franklin's account of the virtues or Mandeville's account of the virtues. The older account of the virtues is that you have the virtues only in a unity. So if you think of the virtues as skills or as drivers to accomplishment, you're not understanding them as virtues, you're understanding them as traits which allow for success. Virtues may very well allow for success, but the point of virtues is that they are partially constituent of happiness or partially constituent of human well-being. They're not just drivers to accomplishment. So if out of envy or greed you're being driven to accomplishment, it's true that might make you smart and industrious and a hard worker and you get up early and you don't waste your money. Those are good things. They're just not virtues in the full sense. They're skills, they're dispositions which are useful, but they're not virtues, pure and simple. In the back.
What if you're working hard so you can rest?
What was the first part of the question?
What if you work really hard so you can eventually rest?
Yeah, so we do work hard and we do have rest. There's nothing wrong with rest. There's nothing wrong with an innocent entertainment. There's nothing wrong with the sort of, I'm so tired, I just want to crash on the couch and put my feet up and exhale and sort of catch my breath. That's all very fine. It's all very human. We're embodied beings, we're animals, we need nutrients and rest and sleep and so on. All good. It's just that it's not leisure or contemplation. Pieper says that one of the marks of a society of total work is a society without leisure or contemplation, even if it allows for rest. But the point of a society of total work, of rest, is so you can work again, as opposed to, well, of course you have to work to live, but the point is to live, not to work. So if you're working to rest, to work, that is a necessity of our human finitude, but it's not the virtuous way of doing it, even though there's nothing wrong with it. It's not the virtue of contemplation or leisure. It's fine. Entertainment's the same way. You know you've done this. You sort of worked yourself almost to death, and then you binge watch like 3 seasons of something on Netflix, right? Because you're understanding still serial perception, right? So you watch like both seasons of Landman in like 2 hours because you're watching it like 2 times speed. How many of you have binge watched like a whole like all of it, seasons 1 through 5 in a weekend? Anybody done something like this? You watched all of Breaking Bad in a weekend. Okay. Now, maybe that's innocent, maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. I don't know. But what it is a sense of collapse of there not being any more ability to continue to work. And so one is, in a sense, entertaining oneself through serial perception into a kind of oblivion, which is quite different from hopeful anticipation of an activity done for its own sake. It might be fine, but it's not leisure.
Madeline gets the last question.
Okay.
This isn't a question I necessarily expected the answer to, but maybe you've come across insight into it. But it seems to me that a struggle that students that have learned to be really successful, or at least have learned to work really hard in their other aspects of life, that it's also, that there can be a tendency or a trap to approach the spiritual life like that as well.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, it's hard to approach prayer as leisure time if you're approaching prayer so that you can be productive there to get closer to God, the same way that you would be productive in school to like get closer to your goal. And even like leisure on Sunday can end up with sort of this really unhelpful, dangerous place.
That's right. I myself am deeply skeptical. I know people who use these and they love them and it's helpful for them. Great. I'm myself deeply suspicious of kind of like the spiritual apps or spiritual hacks. Like, here's the Hallows app. Just do this stuff and you'll like know God. I don't know if that's true. You know, there's that old story, it's told all the time. I've heard a dozen priests tell this story. I don't know if it's true or not, but you get the point. Too good to check. Too good to check. The story of the priest who's always, he's in his parish, hanging out in his parish all the time. And every morning this sort of like poor peasant character sort of pops in for 5 seconds and opens the door, genuflects and runs back out. You've all heard this story, right? And eventually the priest grabs this peasant guy. He's from the old country, right, where there's peasants. He's like, what are you doing here? And he's like, I come in, I look at him, and he looks at me. That's what you do with a friend, don't you? So I've been married for 26 years. Let's imagine I went home tonight and I said, Amy, we have to have a chat. Already, like, anxiety is induced, right? We need to have a chat. Amy, we've been married for 26 years. I'd rate our marriage a solid B-. How could we optimize it? Like, we need to optimize romance around here. And we need to optimize, the family budget. The one might make sense, right? Like, if I say to her, let's optimize the family budget, she's probably going to agree with me, right? And be like, good, that's just responsible. If I say to her, we need to optimize romance around here, how do you think she's going to respond to me? Nervous chuckles. That'd be weird. It'd be offensive. It would so miss the point of marriage and the friendship peculiar to marriage as to be unfitting and off. I mean, what we're trying to do is to know God and enjoy Him forever. Yeah? We're trying to have whatever the beatific vision is or the kingdom of God is. Isn't that what we're trying to do? Our prayer is supposed to be a foretaste and a partial participation of the beatific vision. I mean, when we sing the Sanctus, where are we when we sing the Sanctus? Father will correct me if I'm overly imaginative on this. When and where are we when we're singing the Sanctus? We're in the throne room of God, joining in with all the saints and all the angels. Yeah, we're not technically in kairotic time and kairotic place, sitting in the parish in New York in 2026. We're caught up into the eternal, unending, ceaseless praise of the choirs of angels and the saints in front of the face of God. You want to optimize that? That would seem to massively miss the point. Now, all the manuals tell us we can become better at prayer, but none of the manuals tell you that you become better at prayer by saying more prayers or faster prayers. None of them say that you become better at prayer if you've done like all the novenas. The sort of like the Catholic type who collects like spiritual devotions, and they're like, I'm doing like 24 novenas right now. Oh man, I forget the Angelus today. You're doing 24, great, good. You have 24 intentions, you're doing 24 novenas, that's great, that's wonderful. But the point isn't to like multiply devotions. The point is to befriend God. I look at Him, He looks at me. Thanks everybody, good to be here.